I wanted to show you this video. I got this right off your Twitter feed. This is fantastic. This is from the hearings with Redfield, the former CDC director, and this is very interesting. They're talking about Fauci and the gain of function, and the reason why I bring this up because this just happened. And Fauci's famously, I'm going to show you the video in a second. He's now still lying about gain of function in the lab leak theory. So here we go.
Dr. Fauci was affirmatively told in an email that NIAID had a monetary relationship with the Wu Institute through EcoHealth Alliance. He was told this in January 27th of 2020. Do you think that Dr. Fauci intentionally lied under oath to Senator Paul when he vehemently denied NIH's funding of gain-of-function research?
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
I'm out of time. Thank you.
Okay, so there's two things I want to ask. First of all, what if that's true, then didn't the United States government, under the tutelage of Fauci, under his direction, didn't they created this pandemic then that killed millions of people? Aren't they now mass murderers? Am I wrong about this? What am I missing?
Yeah, I like what Redfield said because he's right on that. It was Fauci funded the study that taught the Chinese, or military scientists, and that lab is a military lab, and he taught them cutting edge technology for building weapons of mass destruction. Not only did he teach them the study for how to create the clones and how to create a spike protein that could attach to the human lung and transplant it onto a coronavirus. He also funded, through Ralph Barrick at the University of North Carolina, a technique called the seamless ligation technique, which is a technique for hiding human tampering on that virus after you've done it. Because normally that virus, anybody can look at that virus and say that was made in a lab. Fauci funded Barrick. He gave him $212 million. And Barrick developed a technique for hiding the human tampering. He calls it the no-seam technique, also known as seamless ligation. He taught that to Xi Zhengli, the Chinese fat lady. Fauci said, well, we were doing this for vaccine development and countermeasures. There is no justification in the world for funding somebody to create seamless ligation, a no-seam. It has any medical benefit whatsoever. In fact, it's the opposite, it's the inverse of what you would do if your interest was public health. If your interest was bioweapons creation, and he was the czar of bioweapons since 2002, that's what you would do. But why did he teach it to the Chinese? And more importantly, why was, as Redfield just pointed out, why was USAID? USAID gave 10 times what Fauci gave. The Department of Defense was there. Why were they in that Wuhan lab teaching those Chinese scientists how to build weapons of mass destruction? USAID is a CIA front group. EcoHealth Alliance is a CIA front group. The CIA modeled this outbreak in 2019 2 times. The second time at Event 201, and who was at Event 201? Avril Haines co-hosted it with Bill Gates. And the head of this Chinese CDC, George Gao, was there. The virus was already circulating in Wuhan at that time. Nobody knew it, but George Gao had to know it. He's the head of the Chinese CDC and the Chinese #1 expert on coronavirus. He comes to New York in October of 2019 and sits down with Avril Haines, the former deputy director of the CIA, today the director of national intelligence, the top spy in our country. And they do a 4-part simulation. And the 4th part is, how do we hide it? And anybody can go on YouTube right now. And I can't believe they left it up there. You can go on there, look at Event 201 and look at simulation number 4. And they're talking about, George Gao and Avril Haines are talking about, how do we get people to censor the social media if they start saying this is from a lab leak? This is before anybody ever heard of coronavirus.
Wow.
That's October 2019. Now, when we know from the Vanity Fair article that when Mike Pompeo, who is the Secretary of State, tells 5 State Department branches, find out where this came from. Did it come from the Wuhan lab? Those guys go over and they say, holy cow, they had all this technology that we were teaching them, and they were using humanized mice to see if they could create a pandemic with coronavirus. And Ralph Eric gave them the humanized mice. And they had a meeting to figure out how to deal with this. The intelligence agencies came to that meeting and told them, shut it down. This investigation is over. So the State Department investigation is shut down in March of 2020. And then that gets out, and Congress puts pressure on Biden. And Biden says, okay, I'm going to order the intelligence agencies to do an investigation to find out if it came from the Wuhan lab. Who does he put in charge of that? Avril Haines, the woman who in October of 2019 was modeling how do we hide it if it's a lab leak. Meanwhile, we now know from the Twitter papers that the CIA was working with Twitter, that had a portal through the FBI portal on Twitter where they were censoring information, that kind of information. So the CIA was not only funding that technology and was probably responsible for the infection, the contagion, but they also have been surreptitiously running the cover-up from day one. It's not just Fauci. It's bigger than Fauci.
Now we're finding out of his emails that he was told it was most likely a lab leak. And then it looks like, bribed the two scientists who told him it was likely a lab leak. So with an $8 million or $9 million funding,
$9 million a piece,
$9 million, and then they completely flipped their story and said, no, it couldn't be a lab leak. That's crazy. It came from nature, and that's because Fauci controls the funding to guys like that. And so now this has come out. Here it is, an actual email wherein Fauci and Collins and other experts actually conspire. They have the NIH, the National Academy, put down the Wuhan lab leak theory, and they call it conspiracy. That's growing momentum. Here is the email, wondering if there is something the NIH can do to help put down this very destructive conspiracy that seems to be growing momentum. I hope that Nature Medicine article would do it, but it did, and that's from Fauci. And so here he is 2 days ago on CNN, and now he's come up with a new story. Now everybody is kind of admitting that the lab thing is the most likely thing that happened. Before, you were called a racist, you were called a right-winger, you were called every name in the world because they had to cover...
I got deplatformed.
Yeah, that's right. You got deplatformed for saying this. And now here's his new story. Listen to this.
A lab leak could be that someone was out in the wild, maybe looking for different types of viruses in bats, got infected, went into a lab, and was being studied in the lab, and then it came out of the lab. But if that's the definition of a lab...
So that's comical, isn't it? Isn't that comical? He's saying now, no, it wasn't because of the stuff we were doing in the lab. It's like someone went out, he got the virus outside the lab, even though we've never found it outside the lab before, since, or whenever. And then he brought it back, and that's how it happened. It sounds crazy, right? Because it is.
That's what they call a limited hangout. You give these very guarded admissions, and then some kind of story. People think, oh, well, now he does say it's a lab, but he has a good explanation about why. And that's like a technique they teach at the farm in Virginia at the CIA.
What sounds like what Fauci's doing now is doing his own, what does the word is mean? Remember when Bill Clinton famously did that? Now he's doing, what does lab leak mean? Well, it can mean anything. That's what it seems like he's doing. So it's serious, right? People didn't even know the Department of Defense is involved in vaccine research. Why would they be doing that?
Well, if you want to build a bioweapon, you have to build a vaccine, because bioweapons always have blowback, which is also called the boomerang effect. Even if you're perfectly elegant at infecting your enemy with bubonic plague, the bubonic plague is coming back to your side too. Oh, unlike with chemical weapons or other weapons of mass destruction, you have to have an antidote ready for your team before you deploy any bioweapon. So part of an offensive bioweapon is a vaccine, always. Now, what happened was, after the anthrax attacks in 2002, the Patriot Act was passed. The anthrax was sent to the two guys who were blocking the Patriot Act, Patrick Leahy. The anthrax was used by the neocons and the CIA to get us into Iraq. You know, George Tenet, the head of the CIA, told George Bush it's a slam dunk. He has these weapons of mass destruction. George W. Bush said the worst mistake that he made in the presidency, believing the head of the CIA. They wanted to go to war. And we went to war because of that anthrax attack, because obviously Saddam had nothing to do with 9/11. But a week after 9/11, they sent the anthrax. Now, the anthrax, they sent it to the two guys who were blocking the Patriot Act. So they took the Patriot Act off the shelf, 350 pages on 9/11, and said, we got to pass this. If you're a patriot, you got to vote for it. Nobody read it. The two guys who were trying to block it get the anthrax. It shuts down Congress. 2 days later, they pass basically by acclamation, they pass the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act had in it not only all of these assaults on the Constitution, but it also had a section that said the Geneva Convention, the Bioweapons Charter are still in effect, but no federal official can be prosecuted for violating them. So it reopened the bioweapons arm race that had been shut down by Nixon in 1969 when he ordered all bioweapons destroyed and Fort Detrick closed. Now, the FBI investigated where this came from. By the time they figured it out, we had already passed the Patriot Act, and we were in an $8 trillion war in Iraq that the neocons and the CIA wanted. What did the FBI say? The FBI said that the anthrax was Ames anthrax, and the only place it could have come from was the CIA lab in Fort Detrick. And so it's clear that somebody associated with the Pentagon or the CIA had something to do with that anthrax, because nobody had access to it except those groups. Initially, the Pentagon was very worried about actually launching a full-blown bioweapons arms race, because they said this is very sketchy. The Patriot Act exemptions are very sketchy, and people don't even know about it, and they didn't want to do it, so they took the money that Cheney gave them, $2.2 billion, and they funneled it through NIH, and it all went through Anthony Fauci. So beginning in 2002, Anthony Fauci got a 68% raise from the Pentagon for doing bioweapons development.
Wow.
And he got a raise of billions of dollars a year to do it. And then that's when they started doing all this gain of function. And then in 2014, 3 of those bugs escaped in high-profile escapes from different labs in the United States. Fauci built all these new labs at BU, at Galveston to do his shenanigans. And so 3 of the bugs escaped, and they received publicity. They had smallpox and a lot of really bad things. And then Congress held hearings on it. Everybody was angry. These bugs escaped, and 300 scientists, top scientists, sent letters to Obama saying, you got to shut down Anthony Fauci because he's going to create a pandemic. And so Obama ordered a moratorium. And at that time, Fauci had 18 different gain of function experiments he was doing around the United States. But Obama ordered him to shut them all down, but he didn't. He instead moved his stuff offshore to Wuhan, where he could do it out of sight of these 300 scientists and nosy White House officials who were trying to shut him down. And they continued to do it with Ralph Baric, the same people he was funding here, Ralph Baric and Peter Daszak, and they moved their operations to the Wuhan lab.
I didn't know anything about the origin of this and the bio.
Anthony Fauci is the highest paid official in U.S. history, so he gets $456,000 a year until his retirement this year. More than the president. The president gets $400,000. He, of millions of federal workers, including 4-star generals, congressmen, Supreme Court justice, he is the highest paid. Why is he the highest paid? Because he got that 68% raise from the Pentagon. But the only way he could hold on to that raise is if he kept making bioweapons for them and calling them vaccines.
So, when I hear you talk, and the more you talk, the more I'm convinced that the people who control things are going to control things, and there's really nothing we can do.
Given, as you heard from the introduction, that I have been around for a while and have had the opportunity and the privilege and the pleasure of serving in 5 administrations, I thought I would bring that perspective to the topic today, is the issue of pandemic preparedness. And if there's one message that I want to leave with you today, based on my experience, and you'll see that in a moment, is that there is no question that there will be a challenge, the coming administration, in the arena of infectious diseases, both chronic infectious diseases in the sense of already ongoing disease, and we have certainly a large burden of that, but also there will be a surprise outbreak. And I hope by the end of my relatively short presentation, you will understand why the history of the last 32 years that I've been the director of NIAID will tell the next administration that there's no doubt in anyone's mind that they will be faced with the challenges that their predecessors were faced with.